Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm going to take up more of your questions in another segment of Ask Judy. If you're enjoying these, please do hit like and subscribe. This question is from Jack Kirby. He said, I was really thinking about your answer about time crunches. Can you sense the tension on a set from a director or producer? And if so, how does an actor manage that emotionally when you are feeling that tension and realize they are under the gun to get the scene done and it's not working for whatever reason? Often the time crunches are less about it not working than just that we're under the gun and have to finish. So in that case, yeah, I can feel a bit of the tension of don't mess up my lines is the main thing. The things I can control as an actor: hit my marks, get my lines out, deal with my props correctly, things like that. Don't be the reason they have to do another take. So yeah, sometimes when there's a lot of tension on the set, it can be uncomfortable. So I think you just have to sort of find your own space and stay within your character and work to control the things that you can control. And that's about the best that I feel an actor can do. That's what I do anyway. And then can imagine actors have insecurities. I certainly would. And I can imagine circumstances when you sense you are not making the scene work for whatever reason. I can imagine every actor goes through that. And that has to be so brutal. How does an actor manage that? Because I can imagine the feelings of vulnerability and frustration. Yeah, I've had that happen, and it's tough. And sometimes I dealt with it well, and sometimes I didn't. When you feel like it's just not working, and sometimes that can happen more when you're in a circumstance where you don't feel really supported, or that you trust maybe the director or other actors, that you don't feel like you're working together well as a team. And I would find that happen more when I was on someone else's set. On the Waltons, I was more comfortable and I felt less threatened by the situation because I didn't feel like I was about to be fired potentially, or, I felt like I had enough of a body of work that it would, sustain itself. Whereas if I'm going in on someone else's show and it's a character that I'm not as familiar with, I've done as much homework as I can, but if I feel like they're not really happy with what I'm doing, or the scene somehow isn't working, but I don't feel like I'm safe enough to say to the director, I don't feel like this is working, or I don't have other ideas, but I feel like they're not giving me help, then it's very, I as an actor feel more like I want to play it safe. And you don't do your best work when you're trying to play it safe. You want to feel free to try things and to fail and to dare to be bad. And I don't always go there in a situation if I don't feel safe enough to fail. So that's a tricky one to navigate. And I don't know that I have a complete answer to that. So maybe some other actors out there can share their experience of what they do in that situation. And then you said, finally, sense of self. I was thinking, when you play the same character for so long, does it change you? Do you ever leave the set and say, wait, am I Mary Ellen Walton or am I Judy? Is it hard to shut down, and do actors struggle dealing with who they are versus who they play in a character? I never do. I can usually just drop it at the end of the day. And sometimes if it was a heavy emotional day, it might take me some deep breaths and, a little bit of looking out and reorienting myself to the world around me, as opposed to that scene I was very focused on, in the internal emotions I was dealing with and the circumstances I was creating to be able to play that kind of emotion. So I'm always happy to drop it at the end of the day. I feel like I have plenty of time to put it back there before the next day if I have to do it again. So not a problem for me. And I always knew I was playing a character. And yeah, there's aspects of myself that are in characters when I'm playing something like Mary Ellen that had similarities, like being a tomboy and things like that, being confident. And but did I confuse myself with the character ever? No, I didn't. So that's just, again, my experience. This sort of comment question is from Tamara, who said, although some children and teenagers can have the facility for learning lines, I find it still pretty impressive considering the lack of rehearsal time. I mean, did the kids not have table reads, or did they do this on the Waltons? We did not have table reads. The children didn't anyway. The adults had a table read, but we were never invited to them. So no, rehearsal time was strictly right before we shot. And then the emotional acting really was brilliant, also of Erica Hunton, who played Holly in The Foundling. Although the directors and writers wrote for their characters, you can't really teach emotion when children are very young, I guess, as they do not yet have much life experience to draw from. I think with children, acting tends to be much more just instinctive, and children tend to be more just like natural actors, or they're not. They're either self-conscious in front of the camera or they're not. I think as you start to get a little bit older, you have more capacity to take in information and synthesize it to add that into a character. But in terms of being able to create emotion as a young person, you either can or you can't, is my experience with it. And so if you're asking, if a character doesn't have to have like a real heavy emotional range, then, and they just have to be cute, then great. John Curtis, the twins were brilliant. They had spontaneous moments. They were just being kids, but they were sort of unaware of the cameras. I mean, they were, but they weren't playing to the cameras, whereas you get a little bit older and then kids can start going, oh, I have to show off for the camera. And that's not what it's about. You just want them to be just immersed in the circumstances and being as spontaneous and natural as children as they can be. Teaching the ability to cry or things like that, I think is just a bit more instinctive. Ruth Marner asked this, were your parents or other kids' parents ever surprised, amazed, or even upset by some of the scripts? Did they find some of the characters or plots amusing? I don't really know. I never specifically remember hearing about any of the parents being concerned about script content. Perhaps, Cammie's mom has talked a little bit about with something like the Ferris wheel, where Cammie had some sort of stunt type stuff to do. But she said she trusted the director, the crew, the welfare worker on the set, and Cammie's judgment, that Cammie was also often, she was engaged in those conversations about whether or not she felt comfortable doing it. But with our show, because the scripts were, there was nothing like racy about them. It wasn't as if we were doing some show where there was sex and nudity and things like that were being engaged, in which case I could see parents being concerned about even children being around that if there were kids in the stories. But that wasn't the case with the Waltons. So I'd say it was, from that standpoint, a pretty benign sort of a set. So the scripts, you might think something was amusing or silly or, heavy and intense, but I don't remember anybody being specifically concerned. This question is from Mary Kay Bettina, who said, I especially like the World War II episode since my dad was Army in World War II. He returned home alive but suffered severe hearing loss. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. A question, in what season and episode did the wonderful wood-paneled station wagon start appearing in the series? So that first appeared in season 7, episode 1, The Empty Nest. That was when John was offered a job with Matt Sarvis, I believe, and he and Olivia picked up the station wagon and drove it home. And it was, I looked this up, that it was a 1940 Plymouth Deluxe station wagon, for you car buffs out there. And then this sort of follows that question. This is Paul D. White, who said, just curious about your process on going back and finding the really detailed clips that you insert when talking about certain scenes. I assume you have the entire collection available to you. So I do. I, at one point, purchased all the DVDs as a box set. It included all of the episodes, all the seasons, plus all of the reunion movies. And then sometimes when I have gone to look for an episode, the DVD has been corrupt in some way and it won't play. So sometimes I've had to then separately purchase certain seasons or whatever. So it's been a little frustrating at times, but I hopefully have all of them now. And so then it's a combination of I look up things in Goodnight John Boy, which I often reference, like which episode was this, or I'll search things on the internet, or I will go to the Internet Movie Database and look up the episodes of The Waltons and search for different details. So sometimes it's really a matter of trying to remember which episode something happened in, and then I can pull up the DVD and I can scroll through so it's like, oh, I think that was that episode, and where was it in that episode? And let me find it. And so it is, depending on how detailed I'm looking for references and visual things, it can be a lot of time digging through all of those things. But I like to give that information to my editor as specifically as possible so that he doesn't have to be trying to figure out what the heck I'm talking about. And he doesn't have to spend a lot of extra time searching for stuff that in a lot of cases I am going to be more familiar with. But I think he's getting pretty familiar with a lot of these episodes too, because he has edited all of these for me. So he's seen a lot of it too. And sometimes he just adds stuff because it's not as specific. It's like, oh, it's the kitchen. So he'll add in some extra scenes around the kitchen to sort of add visuals to what I'm talking about. So I always really appreciate that how creative he gets. And then does it take quite a while at times? Yes. For instance, this Ask Judy, you are pulling all the clips of the recipe room. Okay, so that was how involved was that? So yeah, I was just trying to remember different episodes where the recipe room was, and then in which one they found the secret passageway and stuff. So yeah, and sometimes I can't find every reference, and sometimes I'll have to skip questions because I'm like, I don't know what that is. Or some of you might have noticed at one point someone mentioned a scene with Kurt and Mary Ellen driving, I think, Miss Emily to the hospital, and that Kurt's shirt kept changing, one of those blooper things, and I couldn't figure out which episode it was. And then a number of you pointed out that it was in The Wedding, and I hadn't been able to figure out which episode that was. So I appreciate it. So sometimes I throw it out to you and go, what episode was it, everybody? And those of you who've seen the episodes over and over and over again can often tell me which episode I'm missing there. So that is helpful to my research as well at times. So thanks. And that's what I have for you for this episode of Ask Judy. I will be back with more behind the scenes of the Waltons and more Ask Judy soon. Thanks for watching.